We are live on ProLine TV, the Our Lads Football Network, talking Big Ten football. And finally, I get the opportunity to talk about my team, the Michigan Wolverines. And it's been a little bit since I've had this opportunity. And this is also the first time I get the opportunity to speak with our newest analyst here on the Our Lads Football Network, Anthony Broome, who is with the new merger of On3, the On3 network, and Rivals over at thewolverine.com. Anthony, thanks for doing this.
Of course. Easy website name to remember. So,
yes, it is. I like it.
It's always helpful doing segments and stuff like this. But yeah, thank you for having me here. It's good to be here, good to connect, and I'm excited for the season.
I am too. Last year after the big season, I was honest, as I always am. I know in order to be a good analyst, I've learned over the years that you have to be completely and utterly unbiased and use that to your advantage. That because when you know a team because they're your team and you follow them the most, it doesn't mean that you have to let these emotions get in your way of a good analysis, because that's what people detect that, and that what's kind of makes a good or a bad analyst. And last year was a good example. I really did not have a good feeling about last year going in. The quarterback situation obviously wasn't very good, and I think that was obvious. Sure enough, things didn't go well early, but boy, did they surprise all of us fans late in the season and give us a heck of a season after all to remember. But this season is different. This season, I think there's a lot of optimism in my mind. I think there are still a lot of people who I've spoken to who aren't really thinking that this is going to be a team, Michigan, that's going to have a chance. But I think if this Underwood kid comes through and gives them an opportunity, like they haven't had a quarterback for a couple of years, like I think he's going to, I think they're a legitimate playoff contender and maybe even a legitimate national championship contender this year.
Yeah, and I guess to start by putting a bow on last year, it's easy to say in hindsight, now that you know what the results were. Obviously, huge finish to the season with wins over Ohio State and Alabama. But I just think, in a 5-loss campaign, it was just the culmination of, I think there was just too much newness everywhere, too much newness on the coaching staff, the roster. There were guys that left for the NFL all over the place from that national championship team. And I think that everyone was kind of drinking out of the fire hose a bit. And, to Sherrone Moore's credit, they played 4 playoff teams last year. They got blown out by 2 of them. They hung tough with Indiana, and obviously they beat Ohio State. But something that was apparent from start to finish is that the team does play for Sherrone Moore. They just weren't talented enough. They weren't good enough on the offensive line. They weren't good enough at quarterback, weren't good enough at the skill positions, even though, running backs like Donovan Edwards and specifically Kalel Mullings had made some plays throughout the year. And what it forced was their defense to be perfect. They could not afford a busted coverage in a game. They couldn't afford, giving up a 3rd and long conversion. And that they were able to kind of get through all of that stuff and, pull people down in the mud, pull them down to their level down the stretch those last 3 games. It kind of gave them, gives them some momentum and to a certain extent proof of concept heading into this year, where you feel like with the quarterback situation, some of the transfers they brought in on both sides of the ball, the coaching change that they made on, from Kirk Campbell as offensive coordinator to Chip Lindsey, you just feel like they're much better set up to play. I know it's a buzzword, but it is true. Complementary football, where those phases, offense, defense, and special teams, kind of work in tandem. So it's not quite as simple as, hey, you plug the number 1 overall recruit in the country in at quarterback, and all of a sudden you can tack 2 wins, 3 wins onto what last year was. But you do get the sense that they're much, much better equipped, and the talent on the roster is a little more evenly spread out.
Yeah, because as you were saying, the defense, just going back to that defensive line, especially the interior, was just amazing. And boy, did they come through in the Ohio State game more than any other game. And yeah, they're not going to have that this year, but that's okay, because there's other positions on the team now that they're light years ahead of where they were last year. And so that's what I'm really excited about, that balance you're talking about. And we're going to get into it. We're going to go over the depth chart, go over transfers, key transfers, recruits to keep an eye on, and also maybe get your opinion on a couple of breakout performers that you think could take that next step from the holdovers, the veterans from the previous season. So let's start with recruits. So being that you, of course, are with On3 and Rivals, I'm going to go ahead and pop up that site, which I use anyway, and see what we have here for Michigan. They have a 7th ranked class, according to On3 Rivals, 2 5-stars, and of course, Underwood, the quarterback, being 1, and 17 4-stars, roughly 14 to 17 in that range. So, yeah, what do you think about the class compared to the last couple of years overall?
It's a shot in the arm. Even just, Bryce Underwood alone. When you land a guy who is a number 1 overall recruit, a guy who a lot of people think might be the most college-ready passer that's come out since a Trevor Lawrence, and I think it was 2018. That's a win in itself. But his decision to flip was like this lightning bolt where, a guy like Nate Marshall, who's a top 40 guy, had committed to Michigan, flipped to another school, and then flips back to Michigan. That's a blue chip guy. Ty Haywood was the guy that they got during the February signing period. And Andrew Babalola, the other 5-star, was a guy who he predated Underwood by, I think, a month or two. So really, you look at top 3 guys, when you're on that On3 page, arguably your 3 most premium positions on the field. It's not arguable. Quarterback, left tackle, edge. Those are 3 boxes you checked off there. I think there are some sleepers in the mix with guys like Avery Gatch, who's an in-state guy playing guard. I think he's a future piece for them. Nathaniel Owusu-Boateng at linebacker was another guy that committed in December. I believe it was on signing day. He's a guy that could get some early run, with their wide receiver situation. I think all 3 of the freshman wide receivers they brought in have a chance to earn some playing time this year. Andrew Marsh probably being the lead candidate there. Shamari Earls, they go and flip a corner that Georgia wanted to hold on to. They flip him from the Bulldogs, and Shamari Earls is a guy that is going to be in the mix for that number 2 cornerback job as early as this year. Our EJ Holland, our recruiting analyst, has compared him to a guy that Michigan lost in Will Johnson in terms of his length, his athleticism. So if he doesn't start, he's going to be a factor early as well. And you've got other guys in the class that I think will kind of fill in nicely and fit some needs, like Elijah Dotson, who was a teammate of Bryce Underwood's at Belleville. I think in time, a guy like Jordan Young at safety is going to be a very good player. James Sanders at corner. They did a nice job of filling needs via these blue chip type of players, but in true Michigan fashion too. I think that they were able to go into you grab a couple guys that will probably outperform what their recruiting rankings were.
So besides Underwood, which other true freshman do you think has the best opportunity for playing time?
I think it's Babalola at left tackle. He's battling it out with a guy who started, I think, almost every game at right tackle last year in Evan Link, and then he started the bowl game against Alabama at left tackle. Both guys have had really good off seasons. Babalola is a winter enrollee. He went through spring ball. He's 6'6", 315 already. He looks ready to play, and whether that's as a starter or maybe he's in the 2 deep, maybe he's, we've seen Michigan over the years use an extra blocker in like those 6 lineman sets. So Babalola, to me, I think it's probably, it's not quite the slam dunk that I feel, in my opinion, Bryce Underwood would be, but I think at some point this year, he's going to start games and it might just wind up being the opener.
Wow. Okay. And anybody else, anyone on defense, who would be the top guy on defense, you think?
On defense, it would be on defense. I think the best shot would be Shamari Earls.
Okay.
Jair Hill is, I'll say, somewhat locked in as their number 1, but he was a guy who down the stretch last year was sort of benched, and they changed his number and seemed like he was going through a disciplinary thing. But Shamari Earls is going to have a shot to get some time there. Zeke Berry played corner down the stretch while Will Johnson was injured. Jair Hill was going through his situation, and that was his best football of the year, was at the boundary corner spot. So he could be a guy that factors in there. Barry could kick inside and play nickel. I think whatever, they have some options on the back end. So in a scenario where they think Zeke Berry maybe is their starting nickel, maybe a guy like Shamari Earls is in the starting lineup, but I think he's also, if he's not already, going to be pretty firmly in the 2 deep there.
Okay, let's talk about the important transfer kids that are also with the team starting on defense. Metcalf, it looks like he's going to be a big part of it. They added a couple of nose tackles up front. Of course, that's important after losing those 2 stalwarts to the pros that we just talked about a few minutes ago. So I'm assuming those 3 guys are definitely going to lead the pack on defense as far as the transfers were concerned.
Yeah, I think TJ Metcalf will be at the top of that list, whether it's at safety, whether it's at nickel. Like I said, the range of outcomes there is super, super wide at the moment. I think they're sorting that out, and some of it might be matchup dependent, but he's been a constant in terms of guys that we've heard that they have big plans for. Troy Bowles at linebacker is interesting. I don't know that he cracks the 2 deep this year, but I think he's a guy that they have plans for long term. The 2 defensive tackles next to Rayshon Benny, I think that's just going to be a constant rotation for them. Yeah. Benny is maybe the constant of that group, but it's not going to be like last year where you had Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant, and they had to play almost all the snaps because the depth wasn't quite there. You added the 2 transfers there. You've got a Trey Pierce stepping into a bigger role. You've got Enoetta, a guy who used to play edge and is kicked inside. So they added some guys that I think at the very least are going to provide some competition. But I think you probably do have 2 starters in that group, whether it's one of Damon Payne and Trey Williams. I'd lean toward Trey Williams at the moment, but I think TJ Metcalf is going to start somewhere as well.
Okay. And on offense, we have Haynes is going to be a big part of the rushing attack. McCulley and even Simpson. I know McCulley, of course, gets maybe a little bit more pub because Simpson came from UMass, didn't play last year. But this Simpson kid could be interesting.
He could be. And it's this interesting dynamic where you brought the 2 transfer wide receivers that you brought in, and that was one of their bigger needs heading into the offseason. Are guys that didn't really play much last year. I think they may have combined for 5 catches on the season, but both had extremely productive seasons at their in 2023 at their previous schools. McCulley is a guy that seems like he's come in and sort of taken complete ownership of that room. I think he's almost somewhat unquestioned their number 1 at the moment, and he has switched he wore number 1 at Indiana, switched to number 13 this spring at Michigan. They said you got to earn the number 1, and now he's the number 1. So you can read into that what you will. Simpson's going to factor into, I think, somewhere as a slot receiver. There's some good competition there with guys like Frederick Moore, Samaj Morgan. We talked to the offensive coordinator, Chip Lindsey, the other day, and they said they want to have comfortably 6 guys that they can rotate in and out. And, Simpson doesn't have experience in the Michigan offense, but he did play for Michigan's current tight ends coach, Steve Casulo, who was the offensive coordinator at UMass when Simpson had that year where he had, I think, 57 catches for almost 800 yards. So there's some familiarity with the guy and the player there. So it's going to be interesting. And a freshman in Andrew Marsh could factor in there as well. I don't think I mentioned him before. But yeah, it's there's a lot of fluidity there. I think that McCulley is their unquestioned number 1 at the moment, though.
Do you think Marsh or another player, as far as the skill position freshman, who do you think might have the best chance?
It's probably Marsh, and I give him the nod because, one, I think that slot receiver, there's going to be a pretty good battle for snaps there with a guy like Samaj Morgan and Simpson and Marsh, who was a winner enrollee. I think I put a little bit of a premium on that too, especially when you come in with a Bryce Underwood, you get those extra reps together. So I think Simpson probably has the best shot there. Other than that, I think Jamar Browder is probably behind a couple guys at wide receiver, just in terms of being that big X type of receiver, guy that's going to go up and get the ball. McCulley would be ahead of him there. I think probably Peyton O'Leary is ahead of him there right now, but Marsh, I think, is the most well-rounded of the bunch.
Yeah, it is. It's been really strange with the tradition at Michigan, as we know, for many years, having, good receivers, really good receivers, great receivers, and just hasn't been the case the last couple of years. Not sure exactly if it's just one of those things, up and down. It's just the recruiting. It's just the way that it is. But yeah, I'm kind of surprised that over the last couple of years, there hasn't been like that, young recruit receiver that has just been, this is our guy.
Well, and there's a couple layers to that too. The first and foremost is that you got to pay a premium for those guys now. And I'm not saying they shouldn't do that. I'm not saying that they should do that. But the fact of the matter is that if you want the blue chip guys at that position, like you have now at the quarterback spot, you have at left tackle, and you have a couple edge guys now, you're gonna have to pay up for that. And that's a data point there. The other part of it too is that a lot of these guys don't want to come in and block. Michigan has the saying that, no block, no rock. They're going to put the guys on the field that are kind of willing to do the dirty work too. And I don't think that's going to change in this offense, by the way. But there's no, even with when JJ McCarthy was there, they were still a ground and pound run-based football team. Whereas I think with Bryce Underwood and with Chip Lindsey, who has a pedigree, and maybe I'm getting ahead of myself here, but they take shots down the field. They get guys involved, and Underwood's not coming to Michigan to, hand the ball off 50 times a game.
No.
If they have to win a game to do that, they certainly will. But I think that the perception of Michigan as a school where you can thrive as a pass catcher, that's a perception that they're trying to change, and that maybe you don't see the fruits of that this year, but it is something that is in progress, but not an immediate thing that's been addressed.
Yeah, I would guess the next 2 years, especially if it's proven this year that Underwood goes out and he can be the quarterback that everybody believes he can be, then I'm sure the young recruits, the transfers, are going to be, I want to play there. Now that looks good now. Didn't look good before, but now I'm sold. So yeah, I'll do the work now. So I think that's definitely something that we can expect. No question. Great point. Okay. So, and by the way, Haynes, do you think that Haynes is going to be pretty much like a workhorse? Because I know that the last few years, and really, I shouldn't even say the last few years. Historically, it's about that. Michigan goes with that one guy, and then yes, they'll have a really good two, and that's about it. They'll have some really nice young recruits behind them, but Michigan, for as long as I can recall, it's just they're not really this running back by committee program. They're like, let's see if we can find a stud, and then we roll with him, and then we have a nice little backup when we need him.
I think that's a narrative that could change this year, because I do think that Justice Haynes and Jordan Marshall are two guys that, at least now, and this was the case last year in camp when they're talking about Donovan Edwards, Colel Mullings. They see these two guys as 1A and 1B.
Okay.
And at a certain point, they're probably going to ride the hot hand in the game. If Haynes is having a great game, you want him to keep getting carries. Marshall, same thing. And something that's going to give these guys a little more of an opportunity to touch the ball too is that Chip Lindsey does get the backs involved in the passing game. And both of those guys, I think, are capable of that. So, Haynes, that addition kind of broke tight for them in terms of, I think a lot of the additions that they've made in the transfer portal, even going back to when Jim Harbaugh was there, they've kind of been shrewd, smart football moves that Phil needs and do so somewhat responsibly. And that's not to say that they were irresponsible here, but they made probably the biggest NIL investment of anyone in their portal class on getting a guy like Haynes to come to Michigan. So they have big plans for him. And if he was to run away with a job at some point, I don't know that I'd be surprised about that. Same goes for Marshall. I could see him being the lead back. He's a guy that's more kind of off that Blake Corum conveyor belt in terms of, I mean, he looks like Blake Corum when you see him in the football pads. So it'll be interesting to see how that shakes out. But I think that they're going to be, if this Michigan offense is going to be good this year, I think those two guys are going to be the engine that makes it run, as opposed to the freshman quarterback.
Okay. And speaking of the quarterback position, it's assuring to have a veteran backing up your young quarterback. And again, if Underwood's the deal, and we're all excited about that, still it's especially after what happened last year. Nice. You kind of got to feel, especially the coaching staff must feel really good that if they had to, for any reason, go to the backup quarterback for a week or two, that they can go to someone that has a lot of experience in college football, like Mikey Keene.
Yeah, that was a big reason that they targeted him. Over 2,000 career snaps played. I think somewhere around 8,000 career yards, 65 passing touchdowns in his career. It gives you a baseline expectation of what you can expect in terms of the range of outcomes at quarterback. Now, again, he did most of it at Fresno State. He got some starts under his belt at UCF with Chip Lindsey there. So again, there's some familiarity with that, but you've even, and I know Michigan saw Mikey Keene and Fresno State in the opener last year, and it didn't go particularly well for him. But I think if you'd have plugged him onto last year's roster, I think you probably win at least one more football game. I think maybe two. That's how bad Michigan's passing game was. It was the only passing game in the country, and this is with service academies included, that didn't have a passing play of 40 yards or more, which sometimes you just luck yourself into a busted coverage and something like that happens. So crazy. It really speaks to how handicapped that they were there. I think you're right. I mean, if it's not Underwood, or if he has an injury, or let's just say he self-destructs in a game, that you could turn to a guy who's been around the block, who's got talent, who has a knowledge of Chip Lindsey's system. It's a good move for them. I think there's still quite a drop off there in terms of what the offense looks like, but it is still a much more competent quarterback situation.
Okay, let's talk about the top holdovers that'll be back, the ones that the team really relies on. Staying with the offense, let's talk about that offensive line. So from what I hear, it seems to be better than last year because, like you said, it's a big difference between the championship line, and it's going to happen. That championship line was awfully good as any Michigan line that we've seen in a long time. So we knew there'd be a drop off, but now it looks like they're kind of heading back in the right direction.
Yeah, certainly. We led with talking about some of the guys on the recruiting trail. I think those are more long-term fixes. If a guy like Babalola starts, obviously that's you'd say an immediate fix, but there could be some, it's a true freshman. You could take some lumps there, but I think this year and right now, we're in peak. We're 1 week into fall camp. So this is peak. Oh, so-and-so came in the best shape of their lives. Oh, they got their body right. They dropped weight. They put on weight. You hear a lot of that stuff this time of year, but when you look at the roster that Michigan put out, there are guys that will start on this line, like Giovanni Elhadi, like Greg Crippen at center, who have changed their bodies and who did start most of the games last year, but it just wasn't, they weren't as physically imposing as they needed to be, and they weren't as in sync as they needed to be. And I think that's, again, it's all a caveat right now, but the caveat being that it's fall camp, but it just seems like there's a little more unity there. It seems like the physicality is ramped up and they're winning a few more one-on-ones in camp based on what we've heard, with a defensive line that is still pretty deep and should be pretty good. So it's a step in the right direction. I think that if their offensive line can get just anywhere close to average this year, they're going to be a much, much better offense and a much better football team. The quarterback situation sort of got to take the brunt of the heat, and rightfully so last year. They didn't have a power 4 capable passer on the roster. But that offensive line was a big letdown, especially, in fall camp last year. Sherrod Moore stood at the podium and said, "Hey, as long as I'm here, we're good on the offensive line." And it was immediately a problem. And you could tell it was something that bothered them. And I think that they've taken steps to remedy that.
Is there a player coming back from last year's team? It looks like there is a possibility, unless the freshman wins the job, that they're going to bring back everybody from last year. Not all starters, of course, but still, most of those guys, of course, have been here. Any one of those guys that you think has a better chance than the rest to maybe be something special or be something, maybe where he can be a pretty good pro at the next level?
A lot of good buzz early on for the right tackle, Andrew Sprague, who was a true freshman last year. He winds up getting the start against Alabama in the bowl game and played fairly well, and then also had a really good offseason both in the weight room and sort of acquitting himself with his new line mates there. So I think he's a guy that, and some people in the know have even thrown around the word special in terms of what his upside could be. So we'll see on that. Giovanni El Hadi is moving to left guard after playing right guard last season. More natural spot for him. It's where he played in relief of Trevor Keegan a couple seasons ago. And he's another guy, he talked about, we talked to him earlier this week, and he said that last year he felt like he played too light. By the time the season rolled around, he was somewhere around 305, which as an interior offensive lineman is way too light. So now he's around 325, and just seems like the attitude, not that he had a bad attitude, but just seems like there's a lot of a little more of a glow to him, so to speak. So
okay,
that would be the guy I think is El Hadi, and Greg Crippen, a little more understated of a guy, a quiet guy, but we've heard he's had a good offseason as well.
So if you had to best guess, do you think Babaloa and Sprague are lining up out there week one?
I still think that Evan Link probably gets the nod early on.
Okay.
It's tough though, because I think they've really been impressed by the progress that Babalola's made. I think it's this job is just kind of there for him on a platter, but he's got to take it.
Sure.
I tend to. It's going to be interesting to watch because Michigan said very kind things about Evan Link's play last year, but you go dive into some of the analytics, and even just you don't even need the numbers to support it. You watch the games, and it just his feet weren't fast enough at right tackle. So I have questions about how he holds up at left tackle. So yeah, I think there is a really good chance that it is Babalola and Sprague at the tackle spots.
Okay. The tight end position, and we know how big the tight end position is at Michigan. So do they have like a next special guy?
I don't know about special. Marlon Klein, I think, has more to give, and he reminds me a bit of a guy like Luke Schoonmaker, who early in his career at Michigan was just kind of like fourth tight end, fifth tight end, kind of a depth piece. And then his last 2 years, I think he went from his senior year, he had 13 catches, and then he bumped up to somewhere in the mid 30s his last year at Michigan. And then he winds up being, draft pick of the Dallas Cowboys. I think Marlon Klein is on a similar trajectory, just in terms of being a late bloomer. Now I don't know if there is a 1B at tight end. I think right now he is the guy. Hogan Hansen's a guy that I think very highly of. He's been a bit banged up this offseason, so we'll see how much of a factor he is early on. I think that of the guys in the room, I think Hogan Hansen probably has the highest upside at the moment. But Klein, I think, is steady, and he'll be that guy. I don't know if special is the way I would describe it, but I think that he can be a quality Michigan type of tight end.
Okay. As far as the holdovers at wide receiver, is there a player that is definitely considered above the rest between Morgan, Moore, and the rest?
I think Morgan and Moore are probably the two guys that have a lot more to give that you'll see this year. I don't know that anyone's going to necessarily supplant them. Kendrick Bell is interesting. They like him a lot. Peyton O'Leary is a guy that, he's made some big catches for them, but has mostly kind of just been a camp and practice sort of legend. We haven't always seen it on the field, but made a couple big plays in that Ohio State game last year. I think if I had to choose a top three that they'll probably roll out there with, it is McCulley, Frederick Moore, Samaj Morgan. And Samaj Morgan, we talk about guys that have more to give. He is more than just a bubble and tunnel screen wide receiver. They leaned on him a lot in that area last year. I think he had led the team in catches with 27, but he had like less than 140 yards. So he's averaging 5 yards a catch. And yeah, it was.
I don't think I've ever seen that before. 5.1. Wow.
It was bad. And I don't think it was necessarily all on him.
Sure.
But there's a lot of, the term that Jim Harbaugh used to use was meat left on the bone. And I think he can be a little more than just a gadget guy. I think he can be a really good slot for them, but we'll see what the quarterback play looks like. Cause that's really the key to everything.
Yeah. Cause he did it in 2023. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's his numbers there.
Yep.
16.8 average. So we know it's there. Okay. Defensively, there's a little bit more known quantities here. So some guys, and again, that's no big surprise after what we saw the last year and even the last several seasons. So, but they have lost some key guys. But who are the guys? Who are these again? Who are the holdovers that you think we should be keeping an eye on the most? Who's going to be, really making big plays for this defense?
I think it starts with the edge rushers, as it often does at Michigan. I think Derek Moore tied for the team lead in pressures last year with 37, along, Josiah Stewart was up there, and Josiah Stewart had, I think, 9 sacks. Derek Moore just had 4 of them. 2 of those came in the bowl game against Alabama. So if you want to use that as a springboard into the year,
sure,
you certainly can. But I think he's a guy that I wouldn't be surprised if he was a captain, had a really good offseason. Again, all the cliches apply, changed his body, all of that. But, he was a top 40 recruit that has played behind a lot of guys who are in the NFL right now. And this is really his first opportunity to be the guy in Michigan's pass rush rotation. So I'm expecting big things out of him. TJ Guy as well, I think is going to have a big season. He's another one that last year as a senior was really his first opportunity to get extended run, and he performed fairly well. He was the 3rd guy in that rotation. And Cameron Brandt, we've been talking to coaches the last few days, and they've said that they consider him a 3rd starter right now. So that next guy up, they feel like they have 3 starting caliber edge guys to go along with, a combination of some young guys that are still up and coming for the rest of those spots. So okay, I think it starts with the defensive line. I would throw Rayshon Benny into that group as well. Mm-hmm. Not a defensive end the way that those guys are, but someone who, again, has played behind Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham and Chris Jenkins a couple of years ago, a guy who's finally kind of getting his opportunity. He was a pretty highly recruited guy as well, in-state guy. So those 3 guys up front, Moore, TJ Guy, Rayshon Benny, that feels like the straw that stirs the drink here.
And they've got a couple of those linebackers. There's those Barham and Hausman. I mean, those guys, they've had good production over the last several seasons, and this is a big opportunity for them. Just like you're saying with Moore and maybe a few others, where this is going to be a big part of what they can do to lend their hand. And add, saying that is one of those guys a little bit different than the other regarding, how important they are to the defense?
I think they're both pretty important. Ernest Hausman is, your quote unquote green dot linebacker. I think he's the guy that's, first of all, Jayshawn Barham is a bit of an enigma. Like, he doesn't speak to the media. He's a quiet guy. So I think that Hausman by trade is the leader of that group. But Jayshawn Barham is extremely interesting because he's a guy that can play a traditional linebacker role. He can line up and take snaps off the edge. He can drop back into coverage. He can kind of do whatever they ask him to do. And with both of these guys, there were times last year where they were prone to, running past plays or over pursuing plays or just being out of position. And I thought as their play stabilized down the stretch, so did Michigan's defense. There's some things that they did on the back end to make that happen too. But Houseman and Barham, I think they have a chance to be as good as any linebacker duo in the Big Ten.
Okay. And in the secondary, as you said, there's a lot there. There's no Will Johnson, even though we didn't really have him very long last year. But who's that? Is there that next Michigan? Michigan always seems to have that number one shutdown guy at some point every few years. Do they have that guy on this roster yet?
The closest thing they have to that is Jair Hill. Now, is he going to put it all together? Is he going to take the steps they need him to take to be that legit number one corner? I think with him last year, the highs were incredibly high. I mean, some of his best games were as impressive as they could possibly be, but the games that weren't so good were pretty bad. So I think it's all about for him evening that out. There are some people when it comes to draft boards and whatnot that think he could be a first round pick. And I'm not quite there yet. I do think that, he's got a little bit more physical development to get there. Some of that consistency needs to be unlocked as well. But Jair Hill's probably the closest thing they have to that.
Okay.
Zeke Berry was incredibly steady last year, especially at cornerback. So I don't think he's your number one corner, but I think he's your most known commodity there, if that makes sense.
And what's the status on Rod Moore? Because having Rod at some point, and I know they're taking it easy as well, they should, but if they can get Rod Moore to play 80% of the season this year, that would be so huge.
Yeah, we talked to Rod Moore, I believe it was 2 weeks ago, and we asked him directly, like, where's he at the moment? And he said he was at about 80 to 85%, which, at the time it was a week out from fall camp. They're going to be careful with him. They're not going to play him until he's ready to play. They're not going to sacrifice the best version of him just to get him on the field, because it is, it's a long season, especially if you have playoff aspirations. It's an incredibly long season, but if he comes back and let's just say the best that he is 85% of himself, that's still a guy that I think is a potential all Big Ten type of player, someone who, in his time at Michigan, as a true freshman, even showed a nose for the football. He's always lined up in the right spot. They can track how much film you watch on your, on the iPad. And he was a true freshman lapping the field in terms of, the rest of his teammates watching film. So that's how important he is to that defense. And I think they've done a great job of fortifying that position to where they can afford to let him take the time he needs and ramp up. But you drop him into that mix. And I think that secondary, especially the safety group and that starting nickel position, which could go any number of ways, that might be as good as I think their defensive line can be. That might be the best position group on this roster.
Okay. And then before I get your breakout performers, just want to quickly look at special teams, because special teams has been a big deal for this program for many years. And they've got themselves a heck of a kicker. I mean, what a big transfer pickup Zavada's been. I mean, he's getting drafted. If he has another season like he had last season, he's getting drafted, and he's going to have a hell of a career in the pros.
Well, and you can make the argument he should be in someone's NFL training camp right now. Like that was very realistic for him. So to have that guy back, and he was a complete Lou Groza finalist snub last year, just absolutely ridiculous that he wasn't in the mix for that. 7 field goals made of 50 or more yards. I think that shattered the previous record at Michigan. It's just insane how consistent he's been. And, now he's going to have a chance to where, I know everyone likes to break down the game in the 3 separate phases, but you're now looking at a Michigan offense that they can afford to, I don't want to say let off the gas pedal, but once you get to the 40-yard line, you don't have to go for it on 4th down. Like this guy can make it from 60, 65 yards if you give him a shot to. So a huge presence on this team. Special team wise, they're going to have their starting punter, Tommy Doman, transferred to Florida last year. So there's a battle going on with Hudson Hollenbach and Hunter Robertson, who just transferred into the program a couple of weeks ago ahead of fall camp. He was a D2 guy, but really good numbers punting the football last year. So those the punting situation is maybe my biggest question there. The return guys, I think you've got a number of guys who have done it before, like a Samaj Morgan, like an Anthony Simpson. I think Jordan Marshall got time there last year. Micah Kaapana is capable of doing that. Another running back, Amarian Stewart, is a guy they like there as well. So, really, it comes down. Special teams were not as stout as they had been last year, but I think that they've got the pieces in the kicking game to be kind of this vintage Michigan, from kicking, kickoffs, field goals, extra points, and punting as well.
All right, let's get your breakout performers now, and hopefully we talk next year. You'll be able to gloat about being right about a couple of these. So we'll start on offense. Give me a couple of players. Again, holdovers only that you think will take the next step. Who has the best chance of taking the next step?
I don't think it's crazy to say that Jordan Marshall could wind up being the better running back between he and Justice Haynes this year. I think both are going to be pretty darn good, but Marshall's a guy I have high hopes for. Wide receiver, Frederick Moore is a guy that I think it's kind of been a steady progression for him. I think had they had a little bit better quarterback play last year, he might have been a breakout player last year, but I just think that he's got a nice mixture of, he's not super tall. He's only 6 foot or 6'1", whatever it is, but he's a bit of a technician. I think he has the ability to take a top off the defense and, not just needs to sync up with the quarterback. I think that he's a guy that when you talk about the rising tide that the quarterback position can finally be for them now, I think he's going to benefit from that big time.
Yeah, I'm getting so excited about that. I mean, it's funny because when I'm doing research, especially even in the Big Ten, I mean, it's amazing how many young quarterbacks there are. And so I'm doing a lot of research and trying to see what these guys even look like in high school, refamiliarize myself with some of them. And then I get to Bryce Underwood and I'm like, oh, wow, what a difference. What a difference.
I mean, he's going to be such a weapon for them. And it's right out of the box too. It's when you bring in a guy of that caliber, it's not like the sky is the limit. Like there is no hyperbole for a guy like that. So it's very exciting. And
just because you're a 5-star doesn't guarantee you anything. As we've seen this over and over again, even at that quarterback position. But he's different. Okay, defense. Give me a couple of breakouts.
I don't know how much of a breakout it would be just because he is one of the higher rated returning defensive tackles in the country. But I think Rayshawn Benny is going to announce himself this year. I could see him having a really strong last year at Michigan, similar to a guy like Maurice Hurst had. I think it was that 2017 season where he had played behind some guys and then he blew up, late in his career. I'll throw Jair Hill in that category too. I still have high hopes for him. Seems like he's put in the work this offseason, and there's a lot on the line for him because, like I said before, Zeke Berry is a bit of a known commodity there now, and Shamari Earls is not going to cede anything. So he's being challenged, and I think he'll rise to that challenge.
Okay. And before I end this interview, here are the odds. Michigan in the Big Ten, they are 4th. There's a big 4, as you can see, a big gap after you get past Michigan, but you got Ohio State, Penn State, Oregon, Michigan up there. And again, as I was saying with the young quarterbacks, this is what you're seeing right here. Nobody knows what's going to go on with Ohio State. Nobody knows what's going to go on with Oregon or Michigan. So whichever one of these young quarterbacks, and let's say just one steps up and the other two, well, whoever that is, and it could be Michigan, I think that's going to be all the difference in the world right there. It's just an amazing number of big-time players that have left Ohio State and Oregon. And I know that in this day and age, it's transfers, you bring them back in, but it's difficult. And especially when you throw on top of that, you've got young, unproven quarterbacks. So I just don't really think it's going to be that easy for Ohio State and Oregon this year to just, oh yeah, we're great again, and yeah, we're going to blow out everybody. And I don't think that's going to be the case. I'm not saying they're not going to potentially be in the Big Ten championship game. All I'm saying is that I think it's going to be a little bit more wide open than people think.
I think so too. I mean, I think even outside that top three, from like 4 to 9 in this conference, I think you could see any number of teams rise up and be, the storyline this year is who's going to be this year's Indiana.
Yes.
It could still be Indiana. They brought a lot of guys back, and, their coach just wins. And if you don't believe me, he'll tell you several times. Yeah. So, I like the depth in this conference. Ohio State's interesting as the favorite because, like you said, they do lose so much from last year, but it's also not outside the realm of possibility that, they're going to get Texas in week 1. And then I think in week 4, they head out to Washington, to a team that I think is going to be much improved.
I agree.
And I think Big Ten teams traveling multiple time zones last year, I could have this stat wrong, but I think they were 6-22 or something like that.
Wow.
So that's not a gimme by any stretch of the imagination. No. So I think ultimately, I picked Penn State to win the Big Ten we did a football preview magazine as we do every year.
Yeah. I do too.
I think that, with all the roster changes, it's so frenetic now year to year and what these teams and rosters look like. I do think there's still something to be said for experience, continuity, and having a group that's been through some stuff together.
Yes.
Ohio State last year had obviously, they'd have a group that had been through 4 straight losses to Michigan, and they lost a tough game at Oregon. And, they were able to rally from that and win the national title. That Michigan team, and again, I know people aren't going to play the world's smallest violin for the Michigan Wolverines. I get that, but that was a team that went through a lot during that 2023 season that had nothing to do with the guys on the field. And there were the playoff heartbreaks the years before that, against Georgia, the letdown against TCU. I place in order to reach the mountaintop, I do feel like you kind of have to go through some stuff. And as we saw last year's college football playoff Final Four was made up of guys in James Franklin and Marcus Freeman, Steve Sarkisian, Ryan Day, who at one point, a lot of people had either written off, called fraudulent, what have you. So I think this 12-team playoff sets up for redemption for a lot of these types of guys because, you have a little bit more margin for error. And I just feel like Penn State, I don't know if they're going to win the national title, but the Big Ten, I just think their roster is just a little bit better at everyone else's.
Yeah, they don't because they didn't lose all those guys that Ohio State and Oregon did, and they were pretty neck and neck with those teams last year. And I think of course they lost Carter, but everybody's got to lose.
Of course, a lot of people would also say counterpoint James Franklin.
I was going to get to that. Yeah, and I must say, and look, I know that a lot of Penn State fans who already wouldn't mind seeing a change, but in my opinion, if this team looks every bit as good as we think they should look, and they get to the playoffs and can't at least get to the championship game, I mean, what are we doing here? The team is set up right now to win a national championship. And if you can at least get there, and look, I get it. Maybe you lose a semifinal game in overtime and things happen, but I agree. Matter of fact, I think if they had a coach that maybe had a little bit more, playoff production, maybe already won a national championship, I think Penn State would probably be the overwhelming choice to win the national championship. But you just can't. You don't know. He's never won it before, and I don't know. I don't want to hear he won some playoff games last year because come on, who did they beat?
Yeah, I think now more than ever, like you want to have the known commodity, you want to have the bird in hand, but I think if I'm a fan of a team, I want as many swings at the piñata as possible. And if it means that I go to the playoff 4 years in a row and I lose 4 years in a row, but I'm still in the playoff next year, I'm always going to take the shots on goal, so to speak, because you got to break through eventually, right? But there is that aspect of, if not now, when for them? Because I think if they don't do it this year, things could change quite a bit.
And Michigan's sitting there at 25-1 to win the national championship, which is pretty respectful. Again, especially comparing to what happened last year. So it is what it is. Again, I think that I don't know if you've have you made. I know you talked about a prediction. Have you made a prediction yet on Michigan?
Yeah, I think I'm a little more on the. This might not be a surprise to anyone who's listened to us the last hour or so, but I'm pretty bullish on them this year. I think the defense, even if, and we didn't really talk about this, but if there is some sort of Sharon Moore suspension early in the year, I think that defense is going to travel. And I think that that's going to give them more than a puncher's chance to win every game that they play. And it's all about how this offense comes along. And, those road trips early in the year are tough. You're going to Oklahoma, you go to Nebraska, you go to USC, all within the first 6 weeks of the year. It's not crazy that they might go 4-2 in that stretch, or, a 3-3 is even in the range of outcomes there. But the back half of their schedule, I think, is super friendly. You got a tough game, what I think will be a tough game against Washington. But from there, you're going to play Michigan State, Purdue, Northwestern, Maryland. Wherever you think those 4 teams might finish, they are 4 of the bottom half of the teams in the league.
Yes.
So even if they start 4-2, or God forbid 3-3, I think the fan base would probably start freaking out if that happened. There's going to be that ramp to really take that step forward and position yourself for that Ohio State game, which, means everything. I picked them to go 10-2 this year. I think they will beat Ohio State again. I just like what Michigan has. It comes down to the trenches. I like what they have up front on both sides of the ball over what Ohio State has. Ohio State has what might be the 2 best players in college football, but I think Michigan's has retained the ingredients that have sort of, been a nightmare for the Buckeyes these last few years, especially with, I think, 2 running backs that I think very highly of. And who knows, like by that time in the season, I think the Bryce Underwood that we see is going to look very different than the Bryce Underwood that likely starts week 2 at Oklahoma. So I have them going 10-2, losing to Oklahoma, losing at USC. But the way that shook out, and this even surprised me, because when I do the prediction in the magazine, I pick all the games. I'm not just throwing a number out there. I pick every game in the Big Ten, and it's all tied in, and I double and triple and quadruple check.
Okay.
The season that I picked Michigan to have would put them in the Big Ten championship game against Penn State, where I think Penn State would win, because I just think they're more experienced, have a little more talent in some key areas. But that might be a rosier picture for them, but I don't know if the floor is that much lower. I mean, the floor, obviously, it could be much lower than that if you have a freshman quarterback that isn't ready to play, and maybe you're sitting at 7-5 again. But I just feel like there's the boxes that they've needed to check this offseason. I think they've done a pretty good job of that. And I think that defense is going to be one of the best defenses in the country, and that's going to carry them.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. That's my championship Big Ten pick, Penn State over Michigan. And but again, that the thing about this season at Big Ten, as we've talked about plenty of times, these young quarterbacks, we really don't know what to expect. But I think we're pretty confident that if we have to gamble on it and make our best guess, we kind of know what Underwood is, or just from where he's been, and if he just keeps growing into that quarterback that he can be talent-wise, he is more talented than these other kids. He just is. And so if he just stays ahead of them like he is now, then I agree. I think he's that difference maker with that defense that gives him something that they haven't had even in the last couple of years. So I'm with you. I think, but it's relying on all these young quarterbacks. Anything can happen, and that's what the fun of it is. So I'm looking forward to it. I really would think it would be a bad dream, to tell you the truth, if they had another 8-5 type season, because that, in my opinion, would mean either a rash of injuries or Underwood just isn't as good as we thought he was. And I just don't see that. So,
yeah, it all depends on what it looks like too. Like if they go 8-4, but by the end of the season, you have a passing game that look like, hey, you could probably portal for a wide receiver, and this thing takes leaps and bounds next year, or you hung tough, and but that would also mean you lost all 3 of those road games early in the year. Probably it would mean you lost to Ohio State, and if you could find a way to, even just forget the Ohio State game, you find a way to split those 4 games. You should win 9 or 10 games. You really should. So it'll be interesting to watch.
Anthony, I really appreciate this. It was great talking Michigan football with you. I hope we can do this again, especially during the season, because there'll be some big games to talk about. No question about that. We have, even right now, there are links in the description of this video where you can check out, whether you're watching live or on demand, you can check out all of contact between themichigan.com website, and also how to follow Anthony on X. And there's also a link about subscribing to not only the On3 website for Michigan, themichigan.com, but you have a football preview magazine. Is that basically what it is? You put it out like every year?
Yeah, we do. So we do a monthly magazine, but our big magazine in the summer is a 160-page, full-color, glossy football preview. So
wow,
you've got deep dives on every position group. You've got the Big Ten predictions that I just mentioned. You've got deep dives on the recruiting classes. It's all in there. You roundtable discussions. So even if you're not a Michigan fan, I think it's probably the most comprehensive deep dive that you'll get on that team this offseason. Certainly take advantage of that. And if you're a Michigan fan watching, we'd love for you to subscribe. I think the On3 network is building a machine right now. A lot of big additions with the merger of rivals. Yahoo has a stake in the company now. So we a lot of great things on the way. So your subscription not only gets you access to us, but everything that the national network has to offer as well. So we'd love for you to be part of it.
Do you have a podcast, Anthony?
Yeah, we are on the Wolverine YouTube channel Monday and Thursdays. We also have recruiting podcasts that run on Tuesday, and there are we put press conferences on there too. We do clip outs of all of our shows. So just search the Wolverine.com on YouTube, and you'll be able to find all that stuff there.
Well, as soon as we're done, I'll go ahead and add that to the description area. So anybody that's checking us out on demand, you'll be able to see it, because I'll already have had it posted on the site there. So Anthony, again, it was great talking to you, and I look forward to talking to you during the season if we get the chance.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
You got it.